Welcome to Forward Progress on the Hammer Betting Network on this Monday, January 29th. Today, we're going to be talking about the championship weekend fallout, including some questionable coaching decisions in both games, what the losing teams might do this offseason, and our first look preview of the Super Bowl. Do me a favor, like and subscribe to this content. It's greatly appreciated. It helps to boost us in the algorithm. Also, comment any questions you have in the chat, and we'll do our best to get as many of them as we can into the show. Of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsor, Pinnacle. They're the world's sharpest sports book and available to bettors in Ontario. Find out what the pros have known for the last 25 years. Everyday competitive odds, your trusted sports book. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. I'm joined again this week. We're missing one member, but I'm still joined by two superstars, Cleve TA plus EV better, cleveanalytics.com. Sharp Clark, NFL originator, betting analyst at 4for4.com. Let's get the show on the road, and I guess I want to start off with Baltimore, Kansas City. The Chiefs ended up winning 17-10. And Cleve, are you surprised that Baltimore came out with a game plan that wasn't heavily based on the run?
Yeah, I could already see the people in the chat discussing that and pretty pissed off about it. And it's like I tweeted about it earlier. Like I'm as pro pass heavy of a guy as you'll ever find, and this is the one, not the one game, but this was like a perfect situation where you have a quarterback who's just the greatest, probably the greatest running quarterback of our time. You have just a really good run offense, especially using kind of that power run game between the guards and the tackles against Kansas City, which is dead last at defending power run offenses based on according to DVOA. Like that is the one weakness. They didn't have Willie Gay. It was like so primed for, hey, just pound the ball. Just that's how Buffalo moved the ball in the prior week, and they just did none of that. It was crazy that Gus Edwards had one carry, I think, in the first quarter, and it was a 15-yard run, which was great. That he gets that one carry. It was a power formation. He bolts through for that big gain. And that was right after Lamar Jackson on that fourth down went right up the middle for 20 yards, and they just went away from it. I don't really understand. I'm sure there's smarter X's and O's guys out there that can make the claim that Spagnuolo kind of tricked them into throwing more, kind of baited them into that based on some of the fronts that they were seeing. I still thought that they should have incorporated that a lot more. And I'm not saying that would have been a difference in the game, may not have, because, we know passing is obviously more efficient than running in general, but I think they could have sustained more drives and would have had more success. And who knows? I mean, the defense made great adjustments in the second half. As great as Mahomes is, like they only gained, I think, 65 yards in the second half. It was really a good game plan by Mike McDonald to slow them down. And so the offense had plenty of chances to win that game. And it was unfortunate for Baltimore fans that they didn't get it done.
Yeah, they also lost Charles Omenihu pretty early in the game, and I thought there was a real opportunity there. Clark, when we assign a pie of blame for why they lost, right? Some people will say, Monken's bad play calling, Lamar not playing at his best, and then there's the self-inflicted wounds. It felt like dumb penalties that were clear dumb shots, like clotheslining Mahomes, hitting him in the head, the headbutt to Travis Kelce after the play, Zay Flowers spinning the ball at the guy's feet and getting a taunting penalty, and then reaching out for the goal line and getting the ball punched out. If all of that confluence of things doesn't happen, they probably have first and goal from the 1 if Zay Flowers doesn't fumble, and they probably get a touchdown there. And we're looking at a 17-17 game. So when you start to assign blame for why the Ravens lost, where do you think was the most crucial thing that they let down?
I mean, it's important to keep perspective. When two great teams play against each other, one of them is going to lose. And the team that loses, there's what, over 100 plays in a football game. There's a million things you can point at that happen. And the Ravens, they shot themselves in the foot too many times, but it wasn't like the Chiefs played a perfect game either. The Chiefs failed to capitalize on that early turnover on that fourth down stop. Penalties kept them out of the end zone at the end of the first half. And I just think it's a matter of two really good teams playing against each other, and one of them played better and one of them played worse. And I don't think that Ravens fans should be panicking about, is Todd Monken even, like he was so terrible in this game. Lamar Jackson choked in a playoff game. Like none of that is real. I mean, it's a very good Chiefs have a very good defense. Chiefs have a very good team. And they got the better of the Ravens in this one. I think obviously you can point to those mistakes. The lack of discipline the Ravens showed at times was, very alarming, I think, and showed that they weren't as prepared to be there as the Chiefs, but they were in position to make that game a game, and they just didn't do it. So, there's plenty of ways that game could have gone differently.
Nathan asked a great question, which we'll address later in the show when we bring up how San Fran and Kansas City might look to approach the game. Cleve, I wanted to ask you about Kansas City, and specifically, there's something going on in the second half of their games, because did you know that they're down there with the Jets and Giants as far as second half scoring goes? For whatever reason, and it happened against the Bills, we talk about how the Bills in the last drive got conservative, got too aggressive going for the deep shot and then having to settle for a game-tying field goal. The truth is the Chiefs had 2 drives to seal the game, and they didn't. They were one of the lowest scoring second half teams. They didn't score in the second half of this game. I remember they had a stretch in the season where they had 3 straight games of getting shut out in the second half. Is there a reason for this other than, hey, they probably just protecting the lead and then they get conservative when they probably shouldn't? Do you have a reason? Because I can't figure out why they deteriorate in the second half.
No, I wish I had a good answer. I haven't dug in enough to know why. So I can't give you a really good answer. I don't have enough of a background exactly what's going on with each of these games. But yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a open secret to take their second half unders because they just keep cashing in the first half they come out. Who knows? It could be just, Andy Reid has a really good game script. Mahomes comes out firing, and then second half, teams adjust, and, maybe they're just Matt Nagy, et cetera, are just not adjusting well enough. I'm not really sure, to be quite honest with you. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint exactly why. But they've had games when they've needed to turn it on, and I think against the Raiders, for example, when they were in Las Vegas down 14-0 early and blew them out in the second half. So there have been some instances where even against the Bills last week, they were able to maintain that lead, and obviously they would have scored more if it wasn't for that Hardman fumble inside the 1. So I don't know. I mean, they scored against Miami, right? Like I thought they did okay in that game. So maybe. And against the Bengals, they came back. So this might have been more of a first half of the year thing than the last month or so. I mean, I know yesterday was a little different story, but that I think that's more Mike McDonald and that Ravens defense kind of figuring things out more than it was on Kansas City. So I would just say it was maybe they just had to adjust in general. I think their offense in general was struggling until the last month. So I think it goes hand in hand.
Clark, there's a thing in football where we like to overcomplicate things and look in depth at matchups, and this team is better and has advantages here. And you posted a graph, and I thought it was funny of, the guy who's super square and doesn't understand football is telling you, wow, Mahomes getting points as a dog is the way to go. And then the super brilliant guy that simplifies football to, hey, Mahomes is the better quarterback, getting points is the way to go. And then there's the guy in the middle who's saying you need to consider all the things in between. It's funny that football, we talk about, matchups and how good a roster is. And sometimes it just comes down to the better quarterback wins in the NFL. There's not much more to it. Clark, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so
we can hear you.
You were talking about oversimplifying or overcomplicating the game.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately missed half of what you were saying.
I was just bringing up the point is we dive into the matchups. I remember it with the Super Bowl, Kansas City and San Francisco 4 years ago, where San Fran had all the edges and all the right positional stuff. And then the better quarterback just won them the game. And sometimes football is as simple as this guy is the better quarterback or the best quarterback we've ever seen. And it makes you take a step back. Like, what are we really doing here?
Yeah. I mean, I thought Lamar Jackson made some crucial mistakes in this game and Mahomes didn't. I'm thinking about there was a 3rd and 3 late in the game where he was scrambling around and he had the opportunity to throw it away and he ran out of bounds for a sack instead, or 3rd and 1, sorry.
3rd and 1, and turned into a 4th and 3. Yeah.
Led to a 4th and 3. He converted the 4th and 3. Great. But that was a terrible play at the time. Turning a 3rd and 1 3rd and 1 to a 4th and 3 is a terrible decision. The throw into triple coverage, terrible decision, ended a drive that was very promising. There was a throw to the flat to the running back where he just straight missed him on a key 3rd down as well. It led to a punt. And I thought Lamar just didn't bring it in those moments, and Patrick Mahomes did. And, I get that the second half stats for the Chiefs weren't great, but the Ravens defense was playing lights out, and they adjusted to those screen passes and were shutting down everything. They were getting to Mahomes. He had to get the ball out. Nobody was open downfield, so he had to throw it to the flats, and the Ravens were tackling real fast. And I think the Chiefs taking care of the ball in the second half was absolutely crucial to them beating the Ravens in this game. If you look at the games where the Ravens really dominated in the regular season, thinking about the 49ers and the Dolphins games, both of those games were blown open by short fields that the Ravens had based on turnovers from the other team's offense, right? They were kind of trading punches with the Dolphins, and then Tua threw a pick. Yeah. And then that set up a 38-yard field for a touchdown that kind of like blew the game open. They also had a kickoff return to the 18 for an 18-yard touchdown drive. And then late in the game, they had a 32-yard and 8-yard touchdown drives. And then against San Francisco, they were losing, and then they got a 53-yard touchdown drive, and then they got a interception that led to a field goal without gaining any yards, and then a 44-yard touchdown drive and a 9-yard touchdown drive. And so what the Chiefs were doing by taking care of the ball and avoiding mistakes was forcing Baltimore to march down the field. That was taking time off the clock, and it put the Baltimore Ravens offense in more of a panic mode, and I think led to some of the poor decision-making that Lamar Jackson and the play callers had. So I think the Chiefs offense did its job, even though it didn't, put up the stats in the second half. And I think credit goes to Mahomes, and I think Lamar fell short, frankly.
All right, let's talk about Baltimore's next steps, Cleve. I was going to ask, where does Baltimore go from here, especially because Mike McDonald is going to be highly wanted, and some people are connecting the dots with him landing in Seattle. Beat Gamer says the Ravens can't let Mike McDonald go. If it's between him leaving and keeping Harbaugh, you fire Harbaugh, which is at the very least, it's a very tantalizing take. Cleve, Mike McDonald is probably going to leave, right? There's no way they're firing Harbaugh to elevate Mike McDonald. What do the Ravens do defensively if they've got to replace this guy?
Yeah, they're kind of in a cap. I don't know, cap hell is the right term, because I feel like you can get out of it pretty easily, but they've got some cap issues, and they've got a ton of free agents, and this is an older roster. I mean, their entire front four on defense. Justin Madubuike, Clowney, Van Noy, like there's a lot of guys that are free agents this year. And then, I think you got Patrick Queen as well. So you've got some real players defensively that are going to need to be paid, and they don't have a lot of money. And so they got to figure that out. It's more than just the coaching. They've got a roster issue. And that's, we've talked about this when you've got a guy that you're paying all this money to at quarterback, you're going to get those sort of things. But, it's not just the coaching that they've got to deal with. It's the actual roster itself. I mean, I know it's a cool kind of fantasy thought to just say, hey, let's fire Harbaugh and promote McDonald. I mean, it's not realistic. It's not going to happen, but at some point, it's got to be something that I think it's more Lamar than anything. I mean, honestly, like I agree with Clark that he just did not play well at all. And there's just something about these playoff games especially when they fall behind. And that's why the whole running thing bothered me, because they didn't need to just panic and throw the ball over the field. They could have kept running the ball. They didn't need to rely on Lamar's arm necessarily. But yeah, you're not going to make that decision. It's, obviously it's being irrational. Harbaugh's a really good coach, and, sometimes you just get beat like that. So, but they do have to figure out what to do, because their cap is an issue, and, they do have a roster concern especially in the front four defensively. And it's not like they're great in the back end. I mean, they got Kyle Hamilton, they got an aging. I mean, they got to do something with Marlon Humphrey. He's not nearly as good as he used to be. Yep. So it's really just Kyle Hamilton back there. They don't have much talent outside of that. It's more scheme than anything. But I'm sure they'll promote the next guy. No one had ever heard of Mike McDonald before this, right? I mean, he came from Michigan, So, there's always guys that come up, in terms of, promoting guys to become DC, et cetera. So I'm sure they'll be fine in that regard. I'm more worried about the roster than anything.
All right. Clark, Cleve mentioned Lamar. They have been the 1 seed twice under Lamar. The last time was a 14-2 season. They have 0 Super Bowl appearances under him. Their only playoff wins have ever been against Ryan Tannehill and the Titans and rookie quarterbacks. That's it. They have not beaten a true contender in the playoffs. Can Lamar build from this year? Is there a next gear? Because this is his second MVP season, and or are you concerned this is it? This is the best it gets with Lamar.
I mean, I think this is the best it gets with Lamar, but that's pretty good. Like, he's a very, very good quarterback, and he earned the MVP award this year because he's a good player. I don't think he's anywhere near Mahomes' level. I don't think he's on Josh Allen's level, but I do think he's a quarterback that you can win with if you have the right weapons and the scheme and the defense, which they had this year, and they had a shot, right? They were favored to win this game, and they would have been favored in the Super Bowl if they'd have won. So I don't think that anyone needs to hit the panic button on Lamar. I just think realistic expectations should be set on, what this offense's ceiling is with him. And I think it's lower than the ceiling is with some of these other guys. I do think that the attitude, this is anecdotal, but I remember when Patrick Mahomes lost the Bengals game a couple years ago, the next day he tweeted like a picture of him doing a workout with like an alarm clock. And he was like, I'm not losing next year. And I saw a tweet from Marlon Humphrey today that was like, it just hit me today that was our chance. And it feels a little bit defeatist. Like, there's only one guy, like he doesn't speak for every Ravens player, but it does feel a little bit like the Ravens kind of, you could see them kind of losing it on the field. Like I worry about whether they have the right mindset to, pick it up and turn it around next year with a different defensive coordinator, maybe losing some guys. I'll be super curious to see how bettors treat the AFC North in futures markets with Joe Burrow getting healthy. But I think there's a possibility that the Bengals could even be favored to win the division. So that's going to be super interesting. I think the Ravens do have a lot of questions to answer. They're going to have to rely on another elite defensive performance next year, and year-to-year elite defensive performances are hard to come by.
All right, let's talk about San Francisco, Detroit. This was a hell of a game. I feel so bad for Detroit fans because being up 17 at half, you probably were already thinking about the Super Bowl and potentially knocking off Mahomes. Cleve, and then something happened. There was this insane run in the third quarter after San Fran kicks the field goal. You've got the Detroit deciding to go for it on fourth down, not getting it. San Fran throwing a pass that lands off the face mask of the defender into Ayuk's hands. They turn it into a touchdown, then a fumble, then a touchdown, and the game was tied in the blink of an eye. I actually want to talk about the Dan Campbell stuff specifically. A lot was made about his super aggression. What do you make about the two big decisions? A, before the half to kick the field goal instead of going for the touchdown, and then that the third quarter drive where they could have kicked to try to go up 17, but instead went for it, and Josh Reynolds dropped the ball.
Yeah, man, I think the one for the half, I think that turned out to be, I probably would have gone for it, but I didn't mind it at the time because the one benefit to why you go for it when you're at fourth and goal from less than the 5 is if you don't get it, you pin the other team back, right? That's part of the benefit for doing that. So you didn't have that at the end of the half. So you kind of lose that edge. At the same time, you drove all the way down. You had a really good half. San Francisco was going to get the ball first in the second half. So to go up, from a 2-score to a 3-score game, I do think that there was value in that. So I was perfectly fine with that. I would have been fine either way. I mean, driving all that way and then not getting it would have been a little bit of a backbreaker, I think, considering San Francisco had the ball first in the second half. So I think that's what Dan Campbell was thinking of. And honestly, if you watch him, he was agonizing over the decision. I knew, it looked like it was a true coin flip. And he just said last minute, like, no, let's just get the points. So I can understand that one. The other two, I thought it was perfectly fine. Like, I think I'm already annoyed by it. It's just, and this is a week after the whole, down 8 going for 2 thing. It's just like, this is going to be another 2 weeks of this. And it's so nauseating because the guy, that's all he's done all season. That's what they've lived on. Or
That's why they got there, right?
Exactly. It's just like, it's so insane that people think this way and they only think about the negative. And I saw somebody, he's going to remain nameless, but he was on TV and he's supposed gambling expert. And he was talking about how, they only convert 50% of the time on fourth down. And it's like just completely ignorant to the fact of, how many times once they convert, do they score touchdown versus, kicking a field goal, like the actual points added by going for it. He just doesn't understand the difference between 7 and 3, so you can go for it. You can only convert 50% of the time, but if you score 7 versus 3, you're ahead. Like, he doesn't understand that math there. So, that's the thing that's really nauseating. But I mean, look, you have a field goal kicker who's long during the regular season was 41 yards. Michael Bagley was picked up halfway through the year. There's no automatic field goals when you're 45 yards outdoors, in San Francisco. And it didn't, that's the thing. These people that want to quote unquote take the points, just assume that you just get 3 points by deciding to kick a field goal, that you don't actually have to kick it. That would obviously change the math there when, it goes from a 75% chance to 100%. So, I had no problems at all. I mean, that is what it is. And, it was a drop by Reynolds. It was a tough play, but, he dropped the ball and they didn't get it. And, imagine if they would have tried to kick the field goal and they missed it. The momentum would have been all on San Francisco's side, according to all these
people.
He
got conservative when it mattered, right? That's the other story. It's like no matter what happens, if it's good or bad, that decided if it was a good decision. And if Josh Reynolds doesn't drop 2 balls, we're probably having a conversation about what the 49ers do next offseason now that they've lost, right? I want to bring up.
I was going to say real quick. Sorry, George. I do have to mention, because the one decision all the fourth down decisions were fine in my opinion. The one decision that he screwed up on that I think is universal is running the ball on third down at the goal line and then not run. If you're going to call that, you run your field goal team onto the field and kick it immediately. Calling a timeout is the absolute worst. I mean, you end the game by calling a timeout. The game was over whether you scored a TD or not on that play by calling timeout. Yeah. I would have personally, once they get to like the 15 or whatever with like a minute and a half, I would have just kicked the field goal. I know that's just me, and I don't know what the math says, but you need the value of the timeouts and the time was more important than whether you got 3 or 7, I think, in my opinion. So I would have at least kicked the field goal first. If not, if you're going to go all the way down to the end, every throw's got to be in the end zone. You can't run the ball. Or if you're going to run it, you got to run people on the field. Calling timeout there was the worst. So that was the worst decision amongst them all, and that cost them.
Clark, I want to bring up a Mike Florio tweet, and I don't think I've ever said that in my life, that sentence. Just because, if you can bring it up, Jason, just because it feels like this is always the default discussion after these decisions. A coach told me earlier today that analytics was just a way for people who never would have gotten jobs in football to get jobs in football. To understand that is to understand why they get so defensive whenever anyone questions analytics. I want your immediate reaction.
Oh, we're going backwards with this shit. Like, anybody that doesn't understand that analytics is just an attempt to understand optimal decision making using data and, past results plus future projections based on, team quality, etc. Like, anyone doesn't understand the goals, like, can say ignorant stuff like this about analytics without even attempting to understand what it is. It's very annoying.
Yeah, it feels like they don't want to make the attempt to understand why analytics is a thing that a lot of teams or all teams are infusing into their roster. So they have this default position of, this is what's ruined football. I also would bet all the money in my pocket that the coach he asked is not actively coaching in the NFL, because if you don't at least acknowledge this is the direction we're heading, then I think the game has passed you by.
Probably Ron Rivera. No, but you know what's funny? Like, they don't even understand that New England was the pioneer with all of the fourth down decision making, and they had Ernie Adams, who kind of he was their analytics guru for Belichick, and they just kept it all under hood. They never talked about it publicly. He'll never admit it publicly because it was such a kind of such a treasure for them, and such it gave them such an advantage that they didn't want to talk about it publicly. But their kind of golden boy, Bill Belichick and New England Patriots, if they really knew how often he relied on those analytics back in the day, and those decision-making situations, they wouldn't have the same discussion. So it's really annoying. And it's the same old, we're going to have the same stuff going on for a number of years. So I guess we got to get used to it.
I want to play some audio for you and tell me if you think this is off-putting, because I saw a lot of mixed reaction for people responding to it. Dan Campbell's post-game comments to his roster. If we can start it right from the beginning, Jason.
Tell those guys, this may have been our only shot. Do I think that? No. Do I believe that? No. However, I know how hard it is to get here. I'm well aware. And it's going to be twice as hard to get back to this point next year than it was this year. That's the reality. And if we don't have the same hunger and the same work, which is a whole nother thing, once we get the offseason, then we got no shot of getting back here. I don't care how much better we get or what we add or what we drive. It's irrelevant. It's going to be tough. We're better not.
Okay. Obviously, there's nothing there that he lied about. My question is, Clark, if you lost a game where you were thinking at half you're on your way to the Super Bowl and then you get crushed with a loss like that, is that the speech you want to hear in that moment?
I don't take any issue with it. I think it's right. I mean, how does he get his guys to attack next season with the same level of hunger that they had going into this season, now that they've achieved so much of what they wanted to achieve? Like, they haven't achieved everything they wanted to achieve, but they got close and they did a lot. And I think he understands that part of what made his team good this year was that hunger. And so I don't know how, obviously the things he says to his team in private are going to be much more important. Like, players aren't watching their coaches' press conferences, as far as I know. So I think, I think that message actually has potential to be the right one for the Lions, in that, we didn't achieve what we wanted to. Yes, we proved some things to some people, but we didn't finish the job, and we need to come back with the same intensity and hunger next year. So I think that's a good attitude to have for
honestly. And I think I have to step in here, but I do think that I totally subscribe to the disease of me, which is that, I think Pat Riley is the one who coined that years ago, where, you win a title or you get to the championship and you hear about, in the off season, you kind of take everything for granted and you don't come back with that same hunger. I think whether he did it on purpose or not, I think there is going to be some unintentional consequences, meaning, he's motivating them. He's saying, like, by him saying, all right, you're likely not to get here again. Like, that is a motivating factor, I think, for a player in the off season to be hungry and to really have a goal and to kind of prove their own coach wrong, right? If your own coach is saying that, that's a way to rally everybody, instead of saying, all right, we had a great year, we'll be back next year. Like, that's where the disease of me comes, because at that point, everyone just assumes that you're going to make it back. So I have no problems at all with him saying it. I think it's absolutely true. We saw it with the Eagles this year. Like, there is nothing guaranteed. And I would lay a lot of money that the Lions are not going to get back here next year, not because they're not good or they don't have talent, because it's just so hard and you need every break to go your way. So I have no problems with him using any sort of edge in order to help them from a motivation standpoint.
You also need health. Like, it's not lost on me.
Oh, yeah.
The Final Four teams are relatively healthy, and football's often like a sport of attrition, right? Who didn't get the most decimated by injuries? Otherwise, maybe we're talking about San Fran playing against his protege, Kyle Shanahan. But
I do these, I do my off-season previews, and I dig into all these, luck factors, all this stuff, and some of it, you never know, but you'd be shocked at how many times it's like, my God, this team didn't have. Look at their offensive line. Their offensive line is fantastic. I think it drives between them and Ben Johnson. That drives the entire offense. Is that line? It opens up so many things. You just dominate the defensive lines in the trenches, and it allows for pass protection. Allows all their play designs to open up. All those sorts of things. I mean, literally outside of a couple games lost by Jonah Jackson, who's a free agent, by the way, their whole line was healthy this year. They didn't lose any games. That is very rare. That is one area that, like, I see time and time again when I do these previews. The offensive line, if you have a healthy line, like Atlanta last year, nobody missed a single start in the regular season. And we saw they started to get some more injuries during the season this year. And just in general, they were not as good. Like, it's really hard to maintain that. Once you lose that line, right, what happens then? Then Jared Goff is not nearly as effective. You don't have nearly as effective run game, and you're going to lose Ben Johnson. Like, there's a lot of things that went their way that is not going to go their way this year. And, it's really hard for that to maintain. So, it's really hard to assume that they're going to get back there.
All right, let's talk about Ben Johnson, because I guess that's the biggest offseason question. Actually, there's two for the Detroit Lions. Clark, the Eagles failed to replace their brilliant offensive play caller and suffered for it. Where does Detroit begin to look? Because the options are starting to slim. That's the problem of going deep. Guys start taking jobs. I guess Arthur Smith is still out there, but are the Lions going to take a big step back just because they're losing a brilliant play caller here?
I think if they go in another direction with things, yes, there's reason to anticipate a step back. I think I would look for someone in the building who's been paying attention, right? I mean, they have been working on offense for a couple years now, really, really effectively. And if Ben Johnson hasn't been going out of his way to train up his replacement, which I think the really, really good coaches do, then there has to be someone in that building who has understood how this is operating, one of the position coaches or something, that someone has to step in and fill that role. If they go in a completely different direction, like Arthur Smith, I'm more skeptical. But if it's someone that is sort of in the system, has been working with Ben Johnson's playbook, has been working with Goff and this offensive line for years, then I think I'm more optimistic that it's going to be a smoother transition.
You know what point really showcases that is we always get the graphic of all the talent Washington once had in the building, Sean McVay and LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan, and somehow they ended up with none of them. I was surprised to learn that Ben Johnson was on the Miami Dolphins staff for 6 years. And it's just like, don't let the genius out of the building. You better do a damn good job of figuring out who the next man up is. And Kyle Shanahan's done a lot of that. He's done a really good job of, okay, who's next man up? And Detroit better hope that they have a secret genius in waiting. I want to just quickly touch on two coaching decisions this offseason. And I want to start with you, Cleve. I thought the Eagles blew it last year with Sean Desai and Brian Johnson. They luckily said, hey, it's time to move on from both of them. Then they go out and they get Vic Fangio at defensive coordinator and Kellen Moore at offensive coordinator. Is this two home run hires? Did they nail it 1 year later?
Home run, I don't know, but I think they did fine. I mean, the Fangio thing, I mean, you saw it day in and day out. Like, they played well against bad teams, but they never stepped it up against any of the high-powered teams. I don't know. Has he lost his fastball a little bit? Have teams kind of figured out, that too high shell? I don't know. Like that maybe he's just not as proficient as he used to be. I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not well adept from the X's and O's standpoint to know fully, but it's fine. It's better than what they had, and it's a veteran. And he was consulting for them 2 years ago, so at least he has some familiarity with the roster, and they know him. Offensively, I thought Kellen Moore is a good OC. Didn't with all those injuries, and then with the Herbert injury, and it was really tough for him to shine this year. But I thought he did well in Dallas. So I do think he's a little bit more like-minded with an organization like Philly than he was in LA and obviously in Dallas. So I think he'll be additive. He's better than what they had. So I don't think they were home runs, but I think they were pretty good for what was out there and what they needed.
Clark, are you surprised the Atlanta Falcons chose Raheem Morris? The word out of the building is every single executive didn't want Bill because Bill comes in and wants the power, and Blank decided to side with his executives over Bill. So my question is, are you surprised? And then we were connecting the dots with Bill to Buffalo and Philly and Dallas. And it just dawned on me, those jobs all might be open again next year if those teams underperform. So it might just be a 1 year break, and then he still gets his pick of top team going. But were you genuinely surprised that Bill's not going to be coaching in the NFL next year?
I'm not overly surprised. I think I just don't think that he's got it anymore. Like I don't know if that's controversial to say, but his way of doing things philosophically doesn't really vibe with young people today. Like it's just the whole Patriot way thing. Like I get it, like it worked, but the whole shut up and do your job thing, like, isn't what young people respond to. And so these young athletes coming in, I don't think that they really responded to Bill Belichick's coaching the last few years in the same way that they did, 15 years ago. And then you look at the success that Tom Brady had even after he left New England, and the lack of success that Belichick had with the teams that were left after Brady left. And I don't think there's really much of anything to go off of to think that he's going to turn a franchise around at this point in his career. He's not a great offensive mind. He's a great defensive mind, but even that, like, offenses have changed in the NFL, and he hasn't been as dominant on defense as he once was. So I'm not surprised at all that teams want to go with someone young and up and coming, because even if you get Belichick and he does a good job, how many years is that going to last? You're not hiring the next Andy Reid. You're not hiring the next Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan. You want someone who has potential to carry your team for a long time and build up other coaches under him. And I just don't think that Belichick has any track record of doing that. So I'm not surprised. If I was a team, I wouldn't have wanted to hire Belichick either. So I guess, putting myself in their shoes, I get it.
Let's talk the Super Bowl, and we're saving the in-depth matchup advantages for next week. This is what I hate about the break between championship weekend and Super Bowl. You have 2 weeks to talk about one game, and my God, every narrative gets exhausted. But let's talk some narratives in this game. Cleve, what's the better narrative to you? Kyle Shanahan going for his first Super Bowl win, Trent Williams' first Super Bowl appearance, and Mr. Irrelevant possibly winning a Super Bowl, or Patrick Mahomes cements his legacy, dynasty 3 titles in 5 years, and Travis Kelce gets the girl and gets the ring? What is the better narrative to you?
Better narrative? We're doing narrative talk, huh?
We are doing narrative talk.
Oh my God, I hate
next week we're doing Gatorade talk, Cleve, so get ready for it.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's cool though. I think sports in general are always better when there's like a dynasty and, like, not necessarily a villain, but there's one team that everybody's trying to knock off the top. When I grew up with the Bulls and Jordan, we're just dominating, and every single year it was like, who can beat them? Like, I think there is something good about that. So for them to get there again, and if they win it, it just, cements that Mahomes just, maybe the best quarterback of our lifetime. But then also, I think it's always good to have that one kind of team at the top. But I mean, either way, I mean, Purdy winning it would be really interesting, because then he'd kind of be in line with, Kurt Warner and Brady, guys that either were undrafted or really late picks, winning a Super Bowl, which is just incredible, considering how long those odds are to do that. Yeah. So I would like to see. I think Purdy's kind of, the guy, he seems like a really nice guy, like a mild mannered, kind of doesn't do anything wrong. And everyone just rips on him for, Cam Newton, for being a game manager. And, he even said he didn't think he was going to be MVP, and everybody's ripping him for that. So it's like, I don't mind having a guy like that win it. It's it helps all those other quarterbacks and players that are not highly, thought after from coming out of college, that they still have something to achieve. So I don't know. I would say that the dynasty, and with KC, and maybe Andy Reid retires after this, who knows? I think that is fine in my eye. And look, Kelce grew up pretty close to where I grew up. Members of his family actually went to my high school, so we do have that long connection. So I do have a soft spot for Kelce in general, probably more than the average Joe does, is because they're probably sick of Taylor Swift. But I wouldn't mind seeing that.
There's this thing dynamic. It's a basic storyline, right? The hero gets beat down by the villain early in the movie, and he finally overcomes him later. He figures out how to beat him. It happens in sports too, right? It happens. Cleveland lost to Golden State, and then LeBron figured it out the next year. They had to come back down from 3-1. Just perfect movie script level stuff. In wrestling, Cody Rhodes lost to Roman Reigns in the main event of WrestleMania last year. And this year, he's got his rematch to overcome the guy he couldn't beat. And Shanahan lost his Super Bowl to the Chiefs, and he has the chance to conquer that demon and beat the team that he couldn't beat. Here's 2 other narratives we're going to hear a lot of, Clark, the next 2 weeks. Andy Reid with an extra week of rest to prepare, and Kyle Shanahan choke job 2 Super Bowls with a lead, and he never closed either one of them. One as the offensive coordinator in Atlanta, the other as the head coach of San Francisco. Do you buy into any of that?
Not really in terms of, making my number and looking to see which side I want to bet. But I do think some narratives have some truth to it. Like Andy Reid having more time to prepare, like it does matter. Like he's shown again and again that he's really good at coming up with game plans when given time to prepare and knowing his opponent. So that's real. Kyle Shanahan has shown a tendency to be conservative in bad spots, struggles with decision-making in games and big games. That's a thing. So there's a chance that those two things could impact the outcome of the Super Bowl. But again, I'm not really making numbers based off of it. I just think it's just good to know the range of outcomes, and the range of outcomes does include those things mattering.
All right, I've got a few more questions, but I want to hear in the chat any bets that you've already made or are looking at in the Super Bowl. Fire away. I want to see where the chat and the nails have already started to put their money. Cleve, let's talk about Todd Monken's lack of a game plan. He chose not to run it at the Chiefs. Kyle Shanahan, he's probably sitting there and saying to himself, I am going to give a heavy dose of the run game on this team. Is he not?
I don't know. I do think he's going to, want to get the ball in Christian McCaffrey's hands and Deebo Samuel's hands as much as possible. So I can definitely see that. I also can see Steve Spagnuolo and that defense like forcing San Francisco, loading the box and just trusting that they're, McDuffie and Snead and those guys are going to be able to lock down Ayuk and Deebo, et cetera. So kind of forcing the hand, kind of like they did with Monken in Baltimore, and forcing Purdy to beat them. So it'll be a fun chess match. That's why I think, as Clark was talking about, that whole narrative, it's real, because you give Andy Reid, you give Spagnuolo multiple weeks to prepare. I think they're going to come up with some interesting game plans. So, I don't know, kind of how they're going to approach that. If they're just going to try to pound the ball. I think the difference is, with a Baltimore, that is they're a power run team. You've got the most mobile quarterback of all time. And here in San Francisco, Purdy can move, but he's not a RPO guy. So it's a lot easier to kind of, stack the box and come right at him. So I do think they'll obviously want to get the ball to McCaffrey as much as they can, whether it be swing passes. That's the one thing. So Kansas City is really poor defending running backs out of the backfield. So I do think him out of the backfield is going to be more of a weapon than just purely giving him the ball every time. But it's obviously they do lean on McCaffrey running the ball and Deebo running the ball. So it wouldn't shock me if they did that as well. But Kansas City might force that out of their hands. So I love these chess matches. I was looking forward to the chess match yesterday with Spagnuolo and McDonald, and both kind of came through. One was a little bit better prepared on offense than the other, but I think there's going to be something similar here.
Benjamin Solak, I believe, or maybe I'm falsely attributing to him. He said, the Kansas City Chiefs secret sauce is Spagnuolo was such a bad head coach. No one will ever try to steal him from the Chiefs. And it's kind of true, right? Usually if you're a top of your game coordinator, you're going to eventually get poached out of your position. And the Chiefs seem to never have that threat of losing Spagnuolo, and he's been so good for them. Clark, we're learning that Joe Thuney looks like he's got a torn pec and will not play in the game. I guess the two big injuries in this game are Willie Gay and Charles Omenihu for the Chiefs. Now, Charles Omenihu says he's going to play next week, but it looked like the injury was pretty bad, and Willie Gay's been dealing with this neck injury for a while. Who's the more important of the two in this game specifically?
In this game, I still think it's probably Willie Gay. I mean, I really like Charles Omenihu as a player. They started the season with him suspended and looked pretty good without him. And then against Baltimore, it really didn't feel like their defense took much of a step back without him, even though he made a great play early on in the game. Whereas Willie Gay, I think, is part of the middle of the field that is going to be so important to stopping what the 49ers want to do. They have to have strength across the linebacker core. And I also thought that the guys that stepped in for him, I know Chanel was spying Lamar for the most part instead of Willie Gay, and he did a very good job. You could see the discipline in not over pursuing Lamar and keeping him in front of him. That's not really how you play San Francisco. So I think they're going to need more strength at the linebacker position, whereas Menahue on the edge. They have guys that can get to Purdy and Chris Jones and Karlaftis, et cetera. So
and that offensive line for San Francisco, besides Trent Williams, isn't very good. So you could absolutely get to him.
Yeah. Chanel, I said, I think he's a good replacement level player. I think Drew Tranquil. And then Chanel had a play where he let Lamar get through his grasp and make a play. And I'm just like, all right, I guess I got to eat my words that it wasn't going to be that big of an injury. Let's talk the line really quickly. It's funny. We get so caught up on what our power ratings are and what the line should be. And then, come Super Bowl, it's like, all right, let's just simplify it. Who the hell's betting against Mahomes for a third straight time, even though the market steamed against him? The line opened up as high as 3 at, Chris and FanDuel. Our sponsor Pinnacle and a sharp book in Vegas open at 2.5. Everywhere's been bet down to 1. Cleve, were you surprised by the open or the early line movement towards Kansas City?
No and no. I think in our Hammer chat, I said before the game was over, I said San Francisco -3 in the Super Bowl, right? When Kansas City won. And I think everybody said, that's, you can actually get the look at. And I said, it's going to be funny to type out Brock Purdy is favored by 3 over Patrick Mahomes. And I just assumed that everybody would jump on, unless San Francisco had won. This is before the Niners won.
Yes.
Unless San Francisco completely destroyed Detroit, I would assume that everybody was going to kind of push the number down a bit. And that's what we saw. I mean, I thought it would hold at like 1.5, and now it's down to 1 and, trending towards pick. Maybe I do think pick is the floor. I'd heard some people talk about maybe Kansas City will be favored. I don't think it will get to that. That's just my opinion. I mean, the market ratings, if you just look at market ratings, this number should be more like 3.5, I think.
Yeah. The problem is though, Cleve, you have to upgrade Kansas City when you go on the road and beat Buffalo and go on the road and beat Baltimore, don't you?
But I'm looking at market ratings now that as of last week was like 4.5 on a neutral. So even if you upgraded that and you got it to 3, just to be fair, which was the opening number, to get it down to 1 here, that's pretty substantial. I think we're going to see more. I think it's closer to the San Francisco will get more sharper action when it's kind of all said and done, and maybe it gets back up to 2 or whatnot. I personally have not taken either side. I will say, one thing I did last year, I did like Kansas City when they were like a 1.5 point underdog against Philly, I think at the time. And I just took Mahomes MVP, and that was like plus 135, 140 at the time.
Yep.
And I know that's not exactly 100% correlated. And maybe this year it's even less, but it's pretty darn close to like 90, 95% correlated. Like you have to really blow me away to have the Chiefs win the game. And then have him not win MVP. You have to have Pacheco, rush for 150 yards. You'd have to have, even if Kelsey has a big game, like you almost always give it to the quarterback, with the stature of Mahomes. It's pretty rare. I think Brady once didn't get it when maybe Edelman had a huge game. But, I could see if you do like the Chiefs personally, and you are at a legal book right now that has these props, like maybe just splitting your action, Kansas City, for half, and then Mahomes MVP for half. I don't think that's a bad way to get squeeze out a little bit more value in your play, but that's something I would look at if I'm a Chiefs backer.
Clark, the Chiefs were dogs against Philly in the Super Bowl, dogs against Buffalo, dogs against Baltimore. Are we gonna learn come Super Bowl? Are they gonna be Are they gonna at the close, if you had to call it, are they gonna go off as dogs, or are you thinking pick, or are you thinking favorite?
I think favorite or pick. I think Chiefs are going to get money here, both public and sharp. I think there'll be some resistance on 49ers just because, how it works. But with the Super Bowl, from what I understand, I've never been on the other side of the counter, but from what I understand, because of the volume of money coming in from rec bettors on the Super Bowl, like it can actually influence the line in a way that it maybe doesn't for a regular season game, which is pretty much just decided by sharp action. Yeah. So I think there's that element. There's the element of what you just said, right? I mean, the public was all over Kansas City against Baltimore. They're flush off that win. They got more money to spend and put down on Kansas City and Mahomes in the Super Bowl. I feel like there's going to be a ton of action on Kansas City. I just question how far it's going to go. I'm with Cleve. I think Caesars had, I don't know if they still do now, but earlier today they had plus 140 on Mahomes to win Super Bowl MVP. I think that's a good pseudo Kansas City bet right there. I'm a little bit annoyed at myself because Last week, I bet Kansas City hard early in the week and just got my face slapped by the market every single day.
There's no way if you told me it's going to 4.5 and 5 at Circa for a bit, I would have called you a liar. I did not see that coming.
The market stomped on my face so hard that when the lines opened up after these games, I was like, you know what, I kind of want to bet Kansas City, but I'm scared. And so I stayed quiet and let the move happen without participating in it this week. And it's one of those things where you don't want to let past experiences dominate your decision making, but at the same time, it had just happened, and I really hated that I had the worst of the number, not the very worst of the number, but didn't have the best of the number on the Chiefs last week, and so I really didn't want to repeat my mistakes. But I do think we've seen the best we're going to see on the Kansas City line. I think it's one way from here. It's just a question of how far it goes.
I also think you cannot approach this game as if it's in a neutral in the regular season. There is something inherently different about the Super Bowl. And the Chiefs have been there a lot lately, and they have a lot of experience. So before we go, next week we will be breaking down individual matchups and how each offense will match up against each defense and give you a better understanding of how the game will go. But before I do, just wanted to read out some of the bets. Michael Arkelian, he's got Purdy Super Bowl MVP at plus 310. James Davis says Travis Kelce does it for Taylor plus 1,300. And Levi TV has, I got Pacheco 240-1. My goodness, that's a really nice bet. Well, I really enjoy everybody. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us on a Monday afternoon. Once again, Forward Progress will have some shows this week. And then next week, we're all going to be going in depth in this Super Bowl game. I want to thank Cleve TA for all the great analysis today. Thanks to Sharp Clark as well. Thanks to producer Jason, and thanks to you, the audience. Until next time.